want to talk about this podium. Last Sunday, the guy who built this is a society member and also a good customer. A retired postal worker from Westland decided to move out to Chelsea because he loves it, so he lives on Sugarloaf Lake. He was driving down M52 and he was clipped in the rear of his car by someone who didn't look while crossing Workner. She crossed M52 and then spun him out, and then he flipped his car and he almost got killed. But he's okay, and so he came out with a scratch. This podium was in his car. And there's not a scratch on it. So a lot of good things happening. This morning we had no electricity. That was amazing too. And then Chelsea Power comes out and fixes it. I tell you what, I want to give kudos to Chelsea Power, because if you're out of Chelsea, out of here, and you have to deal with the larger electric company, you'll be out of power for a long time. So love Chelsea Light and Power. Some people ask me, why do I do this? And my parents are here today. One of the things that I don't tell my parents is that I don't really know my grandparents, and I don't have any grandparents that I can speak of. So that bothered me as a kid, and that made me hunger for history. Now, in the museum started in September, and some people would come in. For example, the latest example is the Taylor family. The Taylor streets in town are named after the Taylors. The great-grandson of one of the Taylors came in and said, "Do you want this painting from 1882? Of course. I kept myself reserved. I said, "Certainly." And I said, "So why would you like to donate this to the museum?" And he said, "Well, my kids don't care about history and they don't want anything to do with it." And I cannot believe it. So, and I know everyone here today also, it's clear that you care about history too. I'll start off by saying, what is history? History is what happened a minute ago. History is what happened 500 years ago. Some people aren't interested in history, and I'm here to tell you flat out, if you don't know your history, you put yourself at a disadvantage. You won't be as successful as you could have been. You won't be as smart as you could have been. These are just basic reasons why history is critical for us to know and to preserve. I have a saying, I'm also a high school teacher, not in this town, and my saying is, life is like driving down I-94. And by the way, for you filming it, this is my trademark statement. If you're gonna make a move ahead, you better look behind you. And that's exactly what history means. If you're gonna make a move, you better look behind you. Look at the Civil War. All the generals there will speak of past battles. Go back to the Greek days, and they'll tell you, well, in this battle, they did this move in this battle. You need to learn your history. And I don't mean to put people down who don't care about history, but you should care about history. Think about this. I have students who will say to me, my family has always been incarcerated in one form or another. I've got nowhere to go. And I realized something, that if you found out today, everyone here, that you had a really close bloodline to the Queen of England, for some reason, that makes people feel, good, exciting. And even though you're not going to get anything from this, you just know you have that bloodline. History connects you to the past, and it connects you to different people, and there's a feeling that sometimes can't be put into words. Back in the day, if you go back 100 years, technology wasn't even as close to what it is today. In the last 50 years, technology has skyrocketed. Those people who survived and brought you and I here today had it harder than we did. Didn't have the technology that we have today. Quadruple bypass was a thing that wasn't even thought of. In fact, I think that celebrated a 30th anniversary recently. 45 years old was the average age in 1900 in America. Most of us would be dead by now. So, of course, I have a smart aleck high school student comes up to me and says to me, "Well, Mr. Diab, the reason why we reach puberty at this age is because we're supposed to be making babies right now because we used to die earlier." I said, "Not you, 25. I say that. But they survived, and I tell you what, I do believe they had it harder, and they were smarter, and they were better, whatever it is. And you know, people say, is there such a thing as the good old days? I think there are. Business is the same. People are just as interested in getting the upper edge on their competitor, or maybe even being crooked, as we've seen in Enron and other places like that in the country. Business hasn't changed, but however, societies do change. Knowing your past gives you an idea of how we should treat each other. Knowing your past also lets you have traditions, which I think is sorely missed. Loyalty, honoring your parents and all those things. And I know some of you look at me and say, what's this young guy talking about? Trust me, after teaching in high school for 10 years, you realize they really did have it right back in the day. And it's very hard today to see this disappearing. So this is one way that I give back to the community. I want to hold on to this history and let people know what we used to do. Our scheduled events today to celebrate the grand opening of the Chelsea grand reopening of the Chelsea Historical Museum. Is first of all, we're going to have guest speakers come up. After the guest speakers are done, you know, I've asked them to speak for about 15 minutes. I'm sure they can speak for more than that, and I'm not going to stop them. On television, they play music in the background. We won't do that here. First off to speak will be Pete Flintoft, followed by Donna Lane, followed by George Winans, and followed by Bob Daniels. And we do have an honored guest today, and his name is John CAHS. John is sitting right there. John, could you raise your hand in the air? There he is. I know, John, you hear this all the time. There he is. I know he hears this all the time, and sometimes you get overwhelmed by the people admiring you, but you know, you mean a lot to us here in Chelsea. So you're just going to have to take it. And John will cut the ribbon, which we're going to set up. Kathy. The Chelsea Historical Society members are here. You can identify us by our tags. And then after we speak, we'll have John cut the ribbon. We'll make our way, and you'll see George Till has set up a Civil War display over there if you want to go by and take a look at that. Where's George? George is over there. Hi, George. Of course, as you know or may not know, Chelsea had an important role in the Civil War and a devastating role in the Civil War. So that's why it's important that we do the Civil War display as well. We're honored to have George here today do that for us. Then we'll go inside the cafe, and we will sign the guest book, and then we will have food. And then we get to go to the museum side and take a look what we have. We might not all fit in there, but you know, rubbing up against each other's shoulders is an okay thing. And then the rest of the day is yours. Have I missed anything, museum members? Yes, we are also going to bury a time capsule. Thanks, Ray. Over there in the corner, McKinley has allowed us to dig and bury a time capsule over there. Oh, speaking of it. This is a gold shovel. Gold spray paint. And John gets to use this gold pair of scissors here. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite Pete Flintoft. Let's hear it.
First of all, I think we ought to give Tom a hand for what he's done. I'm a little unsure as to the format of what I'm supposed to be saying here, and hope you'll just bear with me. As far as love of history, I think that's something we all share in common, and because not all of our family roots, but I think we appreciate we have to appreciate where we came from and where we're going to go. I'd like to devote my attention a little bit to what was here before there was anything. And last weekend, we had a significant amount of water. And I'm sure everybody experienced the water flowing over so many roads and so forth. What we don't realize is that this land was known as the Black Swamps. And if anybody takes a look at I think the original Washtenaw County history, you'll note that when they came from Detroit, they didn't stop here, they went right on to Jackson. And back in 1819, Michigan was organized as a territory. Washtenaw County was divided into 3 townships. It was Ypsilanti, which was the 4 townships on the eastern edge. There was Ann Arbor, which is the next 4 townships, going north-south through Ann Arbor. And then there was Dexter Township. And that was the 12 townships on the west side, Sile and west. And that was the way all legal documents were referred to. I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. As far as settlements were concerned, it's my understanding as an organized settlement that one that you could find on a map that was recorded any place that was of any note was Dexter. In fact, Dexter was laid out by the architect L'Enfant to be the site of the University of Michigan. Didn't make it. But if you look at the way Dexter is laid out, it's a wheel, and that's just like Washington, D.C. was done, the same idea. The problem, because there was water and swamps on both sides, as you know, it's swampland to the west of Chelsea, it's swampland to the east of Chelsea. It was a hard place to get through. And the first activity that I have seen record of was the fact that this was a haul route for Teamsters. And they would come up 52. And they would go, of all places that they were traveling to, it was Unadilla. Because Unadilla was a marshalling yard for an east-west transit that was basically Old Plank Road, which take you into Oakland County. The first establishment, and I may be treading on Donna Lane's territory here, but I told her I was going to do it. The first settlement was not known as Chelsea. It was known as Kidron. And I understand that the story, and I think it's written down, is that it was known as Kidron because of the hill coming up on Main Street was tiring for the oxen. And they would come over, come down, they would cross over the creek, and on the other side they would rest. And it was named, people were religious, and they named it after Kidron. Christ had crossed over Kidron on the Last Supper up to the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, and they're rested. And so for that reason, they're rested. I brought along some things. Many of you must have seen this before. I've got some copies. But there's a letter from Washington, D.C., addressed to D. Pierce, Esquire, Chelsea, which I believe is Darius Pierce, who was a constable and one of the first settlers. Washington, July 22, 1850. Dear Sir, your letter relative to the post office at Kedron, we duly received. And in reply to my communications to the department, or the subject I have just received, the enclosed letter. I knew nothing of the application of the change of name or location of the office until the receipt of the letter. I presume it is on the application of your people, but if not, and not agreeable to those who will do business at the office, I trust you will inform me, the community who you do business at the office should arrange these matters. Yours respectively, Alpheus Felch. And at the bottom it's addressed Chelsea. Reputedly, this is the first communication that the United States recognizes Chelsea. I'm not going to go into the plat of the village of Chelsea. I think you all know it. It was 1834. And that's well written out. Some other things that are kind of a lawyer runs into over the years, and John should be up here talking and not me. But there were other settlements around here, but most of those settlements were at mill ponds, because farmers needed to grind their grain. You find that's why there's a settlement at Jerusalem, at Waterloo, Delhi was one. There are others. It goes on Manchester, of course. The other thing that occurred when the land was opened was the railroad. And when people knew the railroad was coming, there was an activity to record a lot of plats. Chelsea's one of those that was recorded, and it worked. Some of those that didn't are at Lima Center, Sylvan Center. There was a community at Delhi, and there are others. all of these were set out in an attempt to gain the advantage in our town's group. Other folks can talk about the various migrations and how we got here and how we are composed of who we are. I note that traditionally that there's essentially 4 main migrations into this area. The first one are known as the Vermonters, New Englanders. And I understand the story that is that Chelsea is named Chelsea after Chelsea Green in Vermont, although that's not particularly well documented. But there is the Vermont Cemetery on M52 south of town. The Pierce family, I understand, was from Vermont. The other place people came from was upstate New York. And there is, in the land titles, you will always see that the money that came out here to buy these sections of land and then speculate and sell it off, they originated in upstate New York. And it appears to be, it was the Erie Canal. People coming on up from New York, New Jersey, up to Albany on the canal, and they would come over. I can't remember when the canal was opened exactly, but around the 1820s is my recollection. The second group are the Irish, and John should be the one who speaks about the Irish. And they're coming in. The land that people settled on when they first came here were the bits and pieces of prairie, and there was prairie, which were open. Most notably to the south of this town, the land was wet and stayed wet until it was irrigated, finally finishing at the turn of the last century. So north of town and out towards Kavanaugh, there were high areas in the hills where farms were set up and people began farming, and around here. The Great Migration was started in 1833 with the Germans coming in. I looked on the census, and Chelsea says that they don't document Yankee or Native American root, but 28% of the people in Chelsea still claim to have German heritage, 14% claim to have Irish heritage. So anyway, I have copies of this letter, and I'll just put them down here. Anybody wants it? And maybe you've seen it before. I like to collect goodies, and that's kind of what I do. Many years ago, I had an opportunity, with the good graces of the Wilkinson family, to acquire a library. These are books that came here in 1860. I know that because I've documented it. Came from upstate New York. It's the Van Tine family. And is George here, Winans? Because I believe the Van Tines are related to the Winans, but I don't know how, George. But, I mean, they're buried side by side in the cemetery up here. But what's significant about these and what I learned as becoming involved in print and so forth, these are all published in England. And at the 1810s, 1820s, they were brought to New York, and then from New York they came here. They're called saddlebag books. It's because there was not an ability to transport the written word. It cost money, to poundage, to get paper moved from place to place. The prayer book and the Bible are inscribed at Chelsea, Michigan. The other ones are inscribed as simply part of the Van Tine library. And the things that people would read would be poetry. And then I've got 4 volumes of Tom Jones, 1812, that were brought over here. So to me, it's of interest as to how people had to read, and the fact that you couldn't bring a library of books and you couldn't bring a heavy book and you just couldn't get it in here until there was a railroad. And so this is the way the written word came across. And that's why everybody's got some old family Bible that's got really small print. That was the commonest way and most readily accessible way to get the word out. lawyers are record keepers. I hope it'll be a surprise to you that the courts, when I tell you that the courts really didn't care much about what they said, that really it was the lawyers who cared, and lawyers were the first ones who wrote down, I see Nick back there laughing, lawyers were the first ones that wrote down what judges said, published it, and obviously were interested in the fact that other lawyers would know what a judge had said. We obtained an old, what's known as a law register from a man by the name of A.J. Sawyer, who was the first lawyer here. I guess the train's gonna go through. I get time on the train, Tom? I don't know when this law practice was established, but the first entries are back in the late 1860s and goes on through about 1894. It's kept in hand, and the lawyers kept their own dockets, and that's because the courts were circulating. And I've got in this gentleman, he handled any criminal cases in the nature of rape, through foreclosures. An appeal to the Michigan Supreme Court took exactly less than 90 days and it was over. There are also, the way litigation goes back in those days, page 1 would be an action by a creditor against a debtor for an assumption, saying you promise to pay me, pay me. The next page is the action by the debtor against the creditor for slander. And that's the way litigation went. So if you think it was bad, if it's bad now, I think it was always bad. Finally, the last, and this is where I would like to turn it over to the other folks on here, is the industrialization of this town. We're standing in the middle of the set of buildings that was done by Mr. Glazier. I've got something of his, and the one thing I'd have got that still I can pass out and give copies to, is an order book for B&B oil and gas stoves. It has a nice engraving of what this site looked like in the 1890s or the turn of the century. And whoever wants these are welcome to them. I've taken one and framed it because it's a nice lithograph. And I'll put those down here too. The last thing, and I don't know if this is what anybody else is going to do, but I think Tom indicated to say something about families. Okay. Flintoft is, contrary to popular belief, is an English name, like Taft or Bancroft. And the Flintofts came over here into Michigan in the 1820s, started in the 1820s in England, and moved, and they were drovers, teamsters. And they came up through the route I've just indicated to you, up along the Erie Canal. The first Flintoff stopped though, and he met a young lady who was from a much older family who came over in the 1860s. Her name was Sarah Rockefeller. But that was before there was any money. So we finished out of the money. She is buried, her two husbands are buried in the Leland Cemetery on Earhart Road. They farmed and homesteaded in Northfield Township, and my branch of the family is over here. My mother's side is German, as many of you know, Schneider. However, before that, my earliest German ancestor was a Wagner, and they operated the livery stable over here. And then were farmers on the south of town, and then moved in, and my father met my mother, etc. So I can count a few generations on both sides of my family here in Chelsea. So far with me, it's been a great trip in my life, and I went to law school, came back home, I thought I knew everything about this town. I knew nothing, and I continued to know nothing, because each time we dig around, we find a little bit more about how people did things, who was selling what, how the mechanics were, what the customs were. It becomes more and more interesting, and I hope you have an appreciation and interest for these things as I do and as I hope to do for the rest of my life. Thank you.
So next we have Miss Donna Lane from Lane Animal Clinic. Donna's heritage goes way back, and we asked her to speak because her and her husband are fine patrons of the Chelsea Historical Society, and we couldn't think of anyone else to talk who can represent family and businesses in town in the Lane Animal Clinic. It's got their name on it, and they have a whole subdivision, Lane Wood. Without further delay, Donna Lane.
Well, first I want to thank everyone for asking me to do this today. I feel very humble because there is one gentleman in the crowd who could do a much better job than me, and that's Mr. CAHS. Okay? All right. All of my paternal and maternal parents or ancestors arrived in this area by 1866. In 1833, my great-great-grandfather, John Glenn, via the Erie Canal, which was started in 1825, completed, came by steamer and came through where Dexter is now, Ann Arbor, and ended up at North Lake. Now, in that group were three brothers, Charles, John, Robert, and one sister, Jane. Jane was married to William Burkhardt. Now, I hate to say this, but this is where Bob Daniels would fit in and George Winans. Very, very way back in the, okay. All right, John Glenn was known and Charles for founding the North Lake Church. Now, John Glenn owned everything south of North Lake, all the way to West Lake. In other words, this was actually where the Eisenbeiser farm was later on. This is where the golf course is, the North Lake Church, the cemetery. Charles Glenn his farm was where the Yedleys are at the corner of Hankard and North Territorial. It's a little salt box house, and that is probably, in my recollection from my parents and my dad, that this is the oldest standing home at North Lake. Very sadly, a few years ago, the John Glenn home was destroyed to rebuild, or not rebuild, but to build a new clubhouse for Inverness. They kept the tenant house, which is Sylvia Gilbert's house. The barn was moved to Hayes Road, and the rest is history. This area was these people came from Seneca County, New York. That's a Finger Lake area. And as we've traveled through New York in the past few years, this area at North Lake was very much like that Finger Lake area. They didn't settle where the swamp land, as Mr. Flintoff said. They didn't settle out north of town where the Irish went. They came to North Lake. Now these were general farmers. They all had orchards. They had chickens, cows, horses, pigs, everything. And they made their living right there. Now later on, some of them branched out and moved into Chelsea and did other things. But primarily, they stayed right at North Lake. Ironically, I was born on the William Burkhardt farm 74 years ago. That's 100 years after my ancestors came to North Lake. Now I'm going to leave North Lake and I'm going to travel to Chelsea because all roads really lead to Chelsea. And as I travel out of North Lake on North Territorial Road, I'm going to turn left on Stouffer Road. Now originally Stouffer Road did not have a name. It was called the Town Line. It never was given a name until Gene Kessler built his first house. And they couldn't make it a town line. I mean, they had to have a road. I mean, they had to have a name. So it was named after Homer and Eva Stouffer. Now we're going to turn right onto Island Lake Road. And this is really history, and John CAHS told me about this. In the 1600s, the French explorer La Salle plotted this area out, and he plotted where Island Lake Road is. He came from Detroit, Ypsilanti, Dexter, and as I told my children, he ended up at Island Lake Road, Island Lake, where future Pumpkin College was built. But that's just a joke. Okay, now, beef cattle never came into existence until the Lessers, on Island Lake Road started beef cattle in the late 30s. Up until that time, they were just grade cows, the Jerseys, the Holsteins, and probably the Brown Swiss. And no one knew about beef cattle in this area. Okay, now we're going to turn onto Wertner Road. And Wertner Road is a very interesting road. It became larger after a while. It was named after Pete and Rose Wertner. A few years ago on my telephone answering machine, there was a message. Donna, Pete's barn fell in today. I knew right away whose barn it was. And it was my friend John CAHS keeping me informed that Pete's barn had fallen in that day. Now we're going to stop at M52, and at the corner of M52, I don't know how many times my dad would say to me, over here on your left is the Kiss farm. Now, the pop girl married a Kiss. I mean, I heard that time and time again. So now I tell my grandchildren every time we come to that corner, the pop girl married a Kiss. Now we're going to continue on Wertner Road. We're not going to turn left on M52 because M52 is a newer road. And we're going to continue down Wertner Road, and then we're going to turn on Sibley Road to the left. Sibley Road is named after Joe Sibley, who owned the farm where the Bollinger family lives now. Now we're going to enter into, I guess we have to say, kind of a swampy area, because this is where we're going to come into Letts Creek. And Letts Creek was actually moved in 1949, so we could get ready for the new road, M52. The old bridge used to be on the corner right there, kind of at an angle. So they literally moved the creek to the north, to the south, put the new bridge in, and then 1952, M52 was created, and this made a couple parcels of land. Okay. Now when Tom asked me to talk about veterinary medicine, I thought, well, gee, Tom, you got an hour or two or three for me to speak, because I could go on and on and on. Veterinary medicine in 1905, when my husband's father came from Ann Arbor after being told that there was no place for him to work with his brother, came to Chelsea and stopped at the livery stable, which is now Mr. Springer's insurance agency. And Charlie Martin had a livery stable there. And Charlie Martin said, well, Doc, why don't you stay here? You can take care of the horses, answer the telephone. Because they didn't have a lot of electricity, but they sure had telephones back then. And he said, oh, that's a good idea, because I don't know if there's anything for me in Unadilla. And because, it just was a different area. So Chelsea looked much more prosperous to him. And besides, all sides of Chelsea, we had wonderful farms. We had the Whitaker farms to the west, the Nuttons out there. It was just lots. Lawrence Snow and my dad milked cows, and so it was a very lucrative spot for him to stop. Of course, horses were the big part of his veterinary profession. Now, he stayed there until 1917, when he married a little girl that worked in a restaurant where the Village Hardware is, the north part of Village Hardware. Her sister ran a restaurant here. It was 1917. This area was getting industrialized after Glacier left. The Liberty aircraft engine was built here in the Tower building. So he married Caroline. She helped him all these years. And then in 1943, he was killed out making a farm call, coming home one night. My husband was in England, and he returned to the United States in 1945, went back to college, came back to Chelsea with the help of his mother, and built a very, very small little clinic. And then later built a house onto the clinic, and then this became, the demographics of this area changed. The farmers were starting to move out. In 1963, we not only had our oldest son born, but we also lost 16 herds, dairy herds, and this we knew was going to come to an end. So we decided to build another animal hospital. Everybody in Ann Arbor laughed at us. Doc, what are you doing? It's going to be big. You're going to need this much room. Well, within probably 5 years, we outgrew it, and so we unfortunately had to wait a while to get a new one. Then my husband died in 1996, and my son graduated from veterinary school in 1995, John, and his wife, Margaret, my sister, my daughter-in-law, And now I have 4 little girls that are coming every day to help me, and who bought me the corsage today so I could look nice. Then I have to go back, I just need to go back one more thing on background. When Watson Lane came to Unadilla, he came via the Erie Canal. He obviously had run away from home. He was 14 years old, and he was working, driving a team or a mule on the Erie Canal. A man by the name of Jocelyn was taking a load of grain from Unadilla to the Erie Canal to be shipped back east. You don't realize how the Erie Canal changed the demographics of this area. It made it possible for our farmers to get their products back to the East Coast where the markets were. And he said, "What are you doing, young man?" And he said, "Well, I left home." And he said, "Well, would you like to come and live with me?" Now, he was 14 years old. Mr. Jocelyn helped him, he worked for him, helped him build his first house, helped him financially. And this is who the man is, the Jocelyn Lake and Jocelyn Road is named after, is Mr. Jocelyn. Now, after Watson and Mary Ann Lane were married, in 1914, this comes up to me, they called them cyclones back then. Now, John, when did they change it to tornadoes? I don't know, but now we call them tornadoes. The Watson Lanes lost everything they owned with a cyclone. It was horrible. There's 3 pieces that I have at the house that were given to Wilfred by his aunts and uncle. This is a plate that was saved from the cyclone. And it says, "Went through cyclone at Unadilla, June 27th, 1914. I have a King Charles Terrier dog, spaniel, with 1 leg missing and a cream pitcher," and that was all they saved out of that home. Okay, now there's lots of people I have to thank for coming to Chelsea. You have Jeff Daniels in the Purple Rose Theater. You have Jiffy Mix, as I look across the street over here, that has stayed with us all these years. As a little girl, I remember helping my dad, or coming with my dad, I didn't help him. He would load up a sack of wheat and he could bring it into Jiffy Mix, and in turn they would give him flour in return. He could barter for flour, which was wonderful. I mean, it was a real good way for a farm family to get their flour. And they have stayed with us all these years. The Merkel brothers, Craig and Donna Common for the Common Grill, Heidelofs, they could have given up years ago when their building burned, but no, they stayed. We have the Winans family, it's been here for generations. I can't even possibly ever imagine that this would ever be as beautiful as this. This is a dream come true. I mean, can you imagine Ron Weiser, a stranger somewhat to Chelsea, McKinley Properties, rebuilding the Clock Tower Commons? It's just absolutely amazing that we have such a wonderful, wonderful spot to be in today. Now, I have a challenge to all of you. Let's continue supporting our projects. Example, our library, our parks. Encourage business development to come to Chelsea. Let's go back to family values, simple things like reading, cooking, baking, sewing with our children. Let's remember the past, and let's cherish our past, but look to the future. Make Chelsea a place where everybody would like to come or live, and which I think we have. I have one regret today. I am very sorry that my husband Wilfred couldn't see this and be here today to be one of the speakers. Thank you again for asking me on this special day.
Well, what can be said after that except, can you be my grandma? Sure.
Thank you for the facade. For my 9 grandchildren, and the oldest named Chelsea.
Donna, you said it so well. You know, a lot of people who come to my store, we have people from out of town moving into Chelsea, and some people, they don't like that. They say, there's too much development in Chelsea. Well, my response would be, we all came from somewhere, but as long as we keep the town a town worth living in, a nice place to be, I think that's all we can ask for. And led by people like Donna, for example, giving their examples. This next speaker, I'm very happy to know. He is a character. He has some great stories, phenomenal World War II stories. I mean, some things that you will never imagine in a million years what happened to him. And I don't know if you want to tell that story today, but if you do want to know it sometimes, he lives on Middle Street, and just knock on his door and ask him. He'll tell you stories. This is George Winans. George, would you come on up, please? Thank you.
First of all, I'm really surprised at how many people I'm related to in this town. Anyone new here that I had fallen in that line? A little bit of history, and that's about all that I'm going to talk about in history. And I talked to John CAHS this morning and confirmed what this is all about. You people were to stand on the road or in the alleyway by the side of our store, look into the back into the alley. Up at the very top of this building, which is the old Steinbau building, it says harness and buggies. And that was on the second floor of this old building. You can barely make it out. I wish somebody would repaint it like they painted on painted on the building over here, that it was a place for horses. But it's really interesting to think that they rode buggies up a big ramp up into the second floor of the building. Why didn't they do it below? No one seems to have the answer to that. But instead of talking about history, I'm going to talk about my grandfather and his best buddy, Ed Chandler, who were just great people and wonderful to know. And when I first came back from World War II and went into business with my dad, they used to sit in the back room and tell stories. And it was great. And I can't tell you all of them, but I'll tell you some. Right behind, or across the alley from the store, Winans store, there was a back door. It's a little restaurant now, but at that time it was a saloon called, owned by Tommy McNamara. And that was a hangout for the German people, and the back door was reserved for the ladies. So when they wanted to have a short one, they would slip back into the back room, and instead of having to go through the front room, which they never would do. And my grandpa said that once in a while, some ladies who were not German used to slip in there. So to try to keep from anybody knowing it was usually in the evening, in the dark. And but Mr. Seitz bought the McNamara building out, moved it across the street, so there was no way they were sneaking in anymore. So they probably weren't be able to have these little tete-a-tates that they had there. Mr. Glazer's name was mentioned, and in the book that was written about him by his nephew, there was a mention made that he might have somehow had something to do with the Methodist Church, the old Methodist Church that people wanted to replace. Some people did. Somehow that thing caught on fire one night and burned down. So whether he had anything to do with that or not, it's kind of fun to think that maybe he did. But my grandfather Burkhardt, there's the Burkhardt name from North Lake, was involved with the Methodist Church quite a bit and was sort of in charge of making things go. And after the church was built and people were going to church, they started asking people to pledge. And my grandfather was involved in that. So there were two ladies. Bob Foster and I started ushering after the war, and every Sunday at almost exactly 9:30, they'd come in the church, sit in the very same aisle, same seats. We got there plenty early so nobody could take their seats. Well, eventually we got involved in trying to get people to pledge money for just normal running the church, as you know they do now. And they found out that my parents were good friends of these two ladies, and I was too. I'd known them all my life. They lived near us in that section of town where we lived. So they asked me if I would be willing to ask these ladies to pledge. So I went down one night, and they answered the door, and they knew I was going to be coming, so they asked me in and to sit down. I said, "You know why I'm here?" And they said, "Yes." And they looked at each other kind of funny and looked at me kind of funny. But finally, they looked at each other and just nodded their heads. I said, "What's going on, gals?" He said, "Well, we didn't want to tell you this, but when your grandfather was in charge of this type of raising funds for the church, every Sunday he had a big wooden board down in front of the church with every person's name on it that belonged to the church, and who pledged, how much they pledged, those did pledge, and who didn't pledge." And they were insulted and they did not pledge. So every Sunday they did, we noticed that they dropped money or whatever it was into the plate. So I thought, well, heck, I got a chance to hit them. But before the night was over, they said that they would not pledge. And they said, I can't exactly remember the exact term, but by the grace of God, we will get by. By the grace of God, they never did pledge. So they're long gone, but they never pledged. My dad was 16 years old and lived on South Street. My mother was 17 years old and lived on Madison Street. And my dad was arrested one night speeding on the wooden sidewalk with his bicycle. He was going down to see Mother. So the roads were all dirt, and it was tough on a bicycle, but yeah, he managed. So Harold Brooks was the police chief at the time, a great big man, if I remember right. So I found this out because when I was a clerk in the village of Chelsea during the 60s, they had a flood, and all of the papers that had to do with the town were flooded out in the basement of where the police station is now. So just for something to do, I was looking at some of the books there, and I found the one, arrest records. So I started looking through it, and that's when I found my dad's name. And I thought, man, this is going to be fun. I'm going to go over and show this to Dad. I thought there was nothing to it. He was still mad. In fact, he was really furious because Mr. Brooks came down to the school and dragged him out of the class to arrest him and embarrassed him in front of all these people. But it worked out all right because he married my mother and everything was okay. There was a fellow, I'm going to say the name is Dick somebody, lived in the suburbs of Chelsea and had a farm. It was in the village, but the farm property wasn't. And he'd lived there a long time. And all of a sudden, in the neighborhood, a white cat showed up, a feral cat. They never could catch him, never tamed him. But night after night after night, the damn cat was out there screaming and hollering and having a big fit. And he finally got so tired of it that he decided to kill it. So one night he saw it sitting out on the fence post and making a lot of noise, so he got his shotgun and blasted it, blew it to 100 pieces, he thought. So the next morning he was telling his wife about that. And she said, what do you mean? What, you killed the cat? He said, well, I shot it last night. And I'm sure she did not call him Dead-Eyed Dick, but old Dead-Eyed Dick shot this thing. She said, you might like to know you shot our white chamber pot. Yeah, Saturday night. right on top of the fence post. Well, needless to say, that story got around, and everybody and his brother was bugging him about that. And of course, it finally ended up not chamber pot, but the thundermouth. And so he, I think everybody in 3 townships knew about it and kidded him for a lot of years. One thing, not the funny part of it, but we had a lady named Mrs. Combs who lived down here actually for a while, and finally moved out the other side of town. And we had a friend of ours, Dick Kern, who's passed on, and Norma, had a little girl, and she developed some sort of a medical problem. And doctors treated her and treated her and treated her, and nothing ever seemed to make any difference. So one day, Mrs. Combs came over to their house, and they said, "Richard, would you let me see if I could help your little girl?" Well, in desperation, they said, "Of course." So Mrs. Combs went around wherever, picked up herbs, medicines from nature, made a brew, brought it to this little girl, and within 1 week she was on a boat. How do you figure that? And today, I don't think the doctors even approve of that today. The congregational minister episode. During the latter part of the 18th century, my grandfather and grandmother were living on South Street. And one day they had a meeting of the ladies group that did not include the minister's wife. So they asked the minister to come in and said the reason for this meeting was that they wanted to make a present for his wife, or presents, and they wanted to know her clothing sizes. And so would he get them some of her things that she wore and bring them so that they could measure them and so on. And he said, "Well, of course." So he went home, which was next door to the church, and came back in a few minutes and brought these garments. And his, they thanked excuse me, they thanked him very much. And he said, "You know, this is the first time in 25 years I've had my hands in my wife's drawers." So he was kidded on that for a long time, I suppose. And anyway, they thought that was one of the greatest things that ever happened. Moving along a little bit, I think we had, when I was a kid, and I'm sure Mary Jane will confirm this, and Jeanette too, we used to make May baskets in May, and they were quite elaborate, all out of paper, mache and so on. And at the in the evening, one night, you would take the May basket and put it on the porch of the teacher that you liked, and holler, "May basket for Miss So-and-so." And she was supposed to chase you, give you a kiss and a piece of candy. And that worked out great, and I think a lot of people used to do that. Well, we had a guy that lived up on the corner of Madison and Washington Street, and had a lot of trees in his yard, and they're still there today. And he was kind of a cranky old guy. And there was a bunch of kids lived in the neighborhood. The Winans family, the Novus family, the Hart family, on and on and on. There was probably 30, 40 young kids in that small area, and probably we were a nuisance. But anyway, he was married to an older lady, real old lady, probably about 40. And we decided that it would be nice to give her one of these baskets. So we put the basket on her front porch. It was a small porch, actually, and hollered, "May basket for Mrs. Gates." So we'd hid behind the trees, and Roz came out. He was a short little guy. He came out and saw the basket. He picked it, smashed it all to pieces. So we said, "Well, we'll try it once more." So we got another basket, and this one was a bigger one. And again, we put that. Some of the guys that I don't know who would have ever done such a thing, put the basket there, and Roz came out and kicked it, and by God, there was a big rock in it. We watched him under the polar eye for about 6 weeks before he could walk without without limping. I think that's about all the funny stories that I can tell you. There was a lot of different ones too. I think when we tend to think of our ancestors, we don't think about them having fun because they work their heads off all the time, you know. And my grandfather, after the war, my father sold a diamond ring for $2,000. And my grandpa looked at me and said, "That's as much as I used to do in a whole year." And I wonder what they think today. 10 years to sell whatever. And there's so many things that went on that we didn't really appreciate. I don't think anybody that didn't go through it can appreciate the Depression. What a terrible situation. There just was no money. My grandfather said that he made, when he was a kid, 25 cents a day. And during the Depression, I worked for 50 cents an hour, and most people did when they didn't have a really good job. There wasn't any money to do, nothing to buy. You could buy anything because you didn't have any money, but you made do, you know. You stomped on a can and got a piece of wood out of the peat marsh for a hockey stick, and we all had a dog, and it was a really good life. And when you think back about all of the fun times, it was church meetings and church going to family reunions and things. The people would die today if they had to do that sort of thing anymore. But I think there are so many people that do not appreciate what they have. I wish that you could get to them and say, "Hey, you know, you don't need all these things, but you do need them now. So everybody else has got them, I gotta have them." So anyway, to finish this thing up a little bit, she was talking about an episode during World War II when I was a co-pilot on B-24 and went to England, and was fortunate. I was shot down, but I was fortunate enough to get to Sweden and was interned. And instead of being in a prison camp, I was able to be around the country, and they treated us well, good food, good quarters, everything. But finally, when we got on our way overseas, we were going over in a B-24, and B-24s were constructed at Willow Run. So we were within 100 miles on our flight path of Chelsea, so we decided it'd be kind of fun if they could come over and buzz my hometown. So my mother said, "Well, I won't know it's you," and because they're flying around here all the time. So, "Well, you know it's us, all right." So we came up this way, and finally, I almost miss it because you come so far, you don't imagine what the lay of the land is. And I finally picked up the railroad and knew we could follow it right in past the Methodist home and so on. At that time, the water tower was right up where this theater is, approximately where the theater is in town. And so we picked up the railroad, and of course saw the Methodist home, went right up West Middle and up Park Street. When we went by the house on Park Street, I was 100 feet in the air, and I could see my parents down there just as plain as day, standing in the backyard waving at us. And they had my brother Dave with them. And I couldn't help later to think about what a terrible day that was for my parents. Here I was flying to England, and they were taking my brother to the depot to send him to the South Pacific, and my other brother was already in the South Pacific. So I asked him later on what did they do, and said, "Well, didn't have anything else to do. We went to build what it was in Ann Arbor for dinner. Bill Knapp's for winter for dinner." But during the flying over, we rev the props up, and so they make a lot more noise than they usually do. And there's a lady in town named Amanda Cook. Menda lived just a little ways from my folks, a couple streets over. And when she was ironing, I can't help but think, here's this board sort of angled like this. She was on the back porch, and the porch was sloping a little bit, and when we went over, the vibration took her right off into the dirt. But she was gracious as heck on that, and laughed about it too. And so the second time I came over, I was flying a B-25, which is another noisy little plane. And I was flying up Main Street and told my grandfather I would buzz the town. So when I came over, somebody was standing there with my grandfather. He said, "Who's that crazy idiot flew that plane?" And my dad said, or grandfather said, "That's my grandson." The guy said, "Well, that's all right then." I think it's been great. I want to thank John. I can't get by without saying thanks to John CAHS. He confirmed my story of the building and harness and buggy shop. And Tom, you'd be congratulated. And it's wonderful to see all your relatives.
Our next speaker is no stranger to this town and a very gracious man. I don't know if you know him. His name is Bob Daniels. His family is actually a North Lake family, as Donna mentioned. So, Bob, without further delay, please come on up. Let's hear it.
Who said something? George Winans? It's a pleasure to be here today. I thought of some of the things that George was saying, Peter said, Donna said. And I think maybe it's worth recognizing that there was a different environment when you go back quite a few years. Today we're burdened with the televisions and some of the things that occupy our time to our disadvantage. Back then, you know, they had to be imaginative. They had to think of things to do. And they had some great times, and there were some funny experiences that George had brought up. And we think they're humorous now. And I could tell you about some that I wanted to tell you about, but I have a very strong-willed wife. And last night when I was sort of mentioning a few stories, "No, that won't work," she'd say. And I'd say, "Marjorie, maybe you ought to speak. I'm not sure that I want to go ahead with this, but I'll go ahead anyway." You know, in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, things were different. It was more of a freelance society, I think, to a degree, and they were dependent on each other, and the farm community was a part of this community and vice versa. And that was very important. I know that in that period there were some strong families. And I think George made reference to the fact that they didn't always maybe get along. They had different viewpoints, but there were, just to name a few, there were, as George had mentioned, the Burkharts, the Glaziers, the Staffens. And they did a lot of interesting things. And George referenced the Methodist Church. That started in 1853 when some people got together and decided to start a church, and they built a wooden church in 1859 on Park Street. And it was okay. It lasted until the late 1800s, and about 1888, 1889, it caught on fire, and George made reference to that, and I'm not going to go any further with that because that's all speculation. But they decided to rebuild it, and Frank Glazier led this with some other community people, and they built that stone church in 13 months at a cost of $16,000. They dedicated it in February of 1900 And the original preacher, who was the pastor in 1859, came up to speak. His name was Ives, and John CAHS would know that name, I'm sure. And he spoke in the morning, and he spoke at night. And by the end of the second service, they'd raised the $16,000 and paid off the debt. You know, Saturday nights in Chelsea were sort of an interesting time. A lot of things happened, and I remember that there were, to my count at least, 11 grocery stores in town. There were plenty of bars, and there was a pool hall, and a card table room, and there were barber shops that were competing against each other. And they had a lot of fun, you know. And there was a flagpole right in the middle of Main Street, where the two middle streets come from both directions. There was a flagpole that when you drove up Main Street, you had to divert around it to go on, you know. And on Saturday night, they'd have a lot of people there, and the farm community would come in to buy their groceries, and the grocery stores would stay open. And I remember right in front of where is now, what is now Winans Jewelry Store, there would be a farm wagon quite often there. And on this farm wagon would be a piano. And Ruth Niehaus would play the piano, and Jerry Niehaus would conduct singing, and the whole Main Street would be occupied by people singing for Jerry Niehaus and Ruth Niehaus on this farm wagon. Don't ask me what happened to the traffic. I don't know how the cars, where they went. But this was Saturday night in Chelsea, a very special time. I'm going to just mention something about my brother. I had a brother, Jim Daniels, who's 7.5 years older than I. And I just want to tell the story because quite a few of you knew Jim Daniels. And the high school football field was out here on McKinley Road, or McKinley Street. And it was about where the North Elementary is located now. And they had a big boulder in the football field. I'm talking about inside the out-of-bounds lines, about on the 40-yard line on the north side of the football field. And Mother took me out there to see Jim play football. But she warned me that Jim wasn't on the starting lineup. And so I was quite disappointed when the game progressed and Jim never showed up there, and he was in his uniform, but he was on the sidelines. And anyway, with about 2 minutes to go, the coach said to Jim, and I could hear because I was right behind where he was located or was standing, and said, "Jim, Daniels, get up here, go on in." And Jim didn't move much. And then he said, "Coach, if you don't mind, I'd just as soon stay where I am." When I was 14 years old, and the day that it happened was March 10th, a Wednesday in 1943. And I was told by my father that I had to go to work. And so, you need to get a driver's license. And so he put me in a 4-door Oldsmobile, and we drove uptown, and he got out and walked back. And George Doe got in with me. George Doe was the police chief then, and he was the only policeman on the force. And we drove out and somehow got onto Lover's Lane, and which is now called, unfortunately, Freer Road. And it was called Lover's Lane because it was overgrown with bushes and trees and a lot of vegetation. And see, it got that name because, in fact, I used to do it. When the high school kids would go out and park there with their girlfriend, and then we kids would sneak around in the bushes and try to listen to see what was happening. Anyway, all I was trying to do was steer between the trees. I just didn't want to go off the road. I wanted to get there and possibly get my driver's license because my dad told me it was important. And I got up back uptown somehow, and George said, okay, you passed, I'll go in and write. So he just wrote out a driver's license, you know, that's all they did there. So anyway, that was Wednesday. On Saturday, I went to work. And my father ran a lumberyard, coal yard, which is right across the street here in that vacant area, you know, which is this side of the tracks on the west side of Main Street. And they had put together a company there called Chelsea Lumber Grain and Coal Company when they merged January 2nd in 1926 with the Bacon Holmes Lumber Company, which was across the driveway. Anyway, Dad said when I showed up for work, or however it worked, I can't remember, he said, go load 1.5 tons of Pocahontas coal in the back of that old Chevrolet pickup truck. Now, in 1943, the pickup truck was an old one, so, you know, I mean, that goes back a while. And so I went out, and after about 4 tries, I came up and I had 1.5 tons of Pocahontas coal in the back end. That darn pickup truck, I didn't like it too much. It didn't have an accelerator pedal. All it had was a peg sticking up, you know, that when you pushed with your foot, you could feel it in the bottom of your shoe. So anyway, Dad got in the co-pilot seat, and we headed out of the yard and up Main Street, turned at the flagpole, went west, went across the tracks onto Kavanaugh Lake Road, and it snowed a lot. So there were big banks of snow. And you put 1.5 tons of Pocahontas coal in the back of a pickup, the front end kind of raises up and floats on you a little bit. And you put a guy in the driver's seat who doesn't know what he's doing, you got a problem. So, sure enough, I turned into a snowbank, and we did a 360, and for some reason, don't ask me how, we ended up going down Kavanaugh Lake Road like we intended in the beginning. So, we delivered the coal, I got back, drove onto the scales, he got out, and he said, load another 1.5 tons of Pocahontas in the back of that truck, you can go alone now. Never said anything to me. So those were some of the fun times that we had. My brother got out of the service in the Second World War in 1945. He came back and he ran the Chelsea Lumber Grain and Coal Company. My dad, who had a little bit of a heart problem, at least he thought he did, and that's also important, and he went across and ran the Buick Oldsmobile Agency.
What happened though is many men from, nervousness of the battle keep ramming bullets up the barrel. And oftentimes they fire and the barrel would burst or it wouldn't go off at all. And so that was pretty common. I know at the end of the Battle of Gettysburg they found many muskets with 7 or 8 bullets rammed up in the barrel.
Al Johnson was a remarkable athlete. He had a tryout with the St. Louis Cardinals Major League Baseball team, didn't make it, but he was something else. And he was fast. I mean, he could run like nobody of course, I'm doing this by memory, but nobody I've ever known. Anyway, Charlie Cameron was part of the team, certainly, that made the school system as strong as it is today. And he worked hard to achieve that. And I think he, in my memory, played a very important role for this town. Charlie and Al Johnson went rabbit hunting. And they saw a rabbit, got it up, It was, you know, rabbits run fast and then they go this way, like this. So Charlie said, "Get him, Al, get him." And Al dropped his gun and ran after the rabbit, and he caught the rabbit. And then in the last 15 years, because the Common Grill just celebrated its 15th anniversary, Marjorie and I went into the Common Grill. And believe it or not, there was Mr. Johnson. I couldn't call him Al. He was Mr. Johnson and his wife, Al Johnson and his wife. Special, special. Marjorie and I went over and we visited with him. And it really bothered me, and it had been bothering me for a lot of years. And I said, "Mr. Johnson, I need to ask you a question." "It's okay. I need to ask you a question. Charlie Cameron told me that you caught a rabbit in an open field. Is that true?" Al Johnson was soft-spoken, very soft-spoken, very quiet person. He looked at the table and didn't move. And then he looked up and he said, "Yes, it's true, but it was a slow rabbit." Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much, Tom, for all you do.
You know, there's a certain actor that we have in town. And people have said he went to college, went to acting school. I don't believe a thing. He just listened to his dad. That's where he gets it from. Why don't you come on up here? Everybody likes you. This is Kathy Clark.
Well, I really don't know what to put in a time capsule, but I thought maybe we better tell everybody what's in it in case you're wondering. What we have put in it is a CRG directory, a picture of the clock tower complex, a list of our Chelsea historical members, and some items from the Chamber of Commerce about Chelsea, and a newspaper, which was published Thursday, and just a few things. If it's open, 50 years from now, it'll look old. And we were going to put a CD in there, but we didn't think it would last. But these are just what's going on in Chelsea at this time, and the Historical Society has, had a celebration about this. Thank you.
This time I'd like to invite John. Would you like to come up now, John CAHS? After John does his speech.
I'll stay in place, Tom.
Sure. Let's all listen.
I'd just like to say that may the Chelsea Historical Museum long serve the people in this community. And I would like to add that this meeting has been a learning experience. Thank you.
Okay, Kathy and I are going to stand at the back right now. We're going to hold the ribbon. And then we hope to have John cut the ribbon for us.
This is an 1861 Springfield, by the way. The mainstay of the Union Army. Has a socket-type bayonet. Fit on the end. Percussion firearm. Here's a percussion cap. That fit on the cone here. When the hammer discharged, it would fire a spark into the breech, and in turn it would fire the projectile out the end. It was a muzzle-loading rifle, and by that I mean it was loaded at the end The cartridge was in the cartridge box. It was a paper cartridge with a lead bullet in it. You take it out. One of the criteria for a soldier is you had to have 3 good teeth on the right side. Tear the cartridge. You place the cartridge in the barrel. Draw the ramrod. Ram the cartridge down the barrel. Turn the ramrod. And be careful when you push it down with your little finger so you wouldn't discharge the weapon and might use your little finger. You prime it, put the cap on it, aim it, and bang, fire. That's how it works.
I don't know how many families Chelsea's. Uncle Lawrence, any idea how many Boyer families were? I don't know, dozens and dozens?
Haversack that initially during the first part of the war, soldiers wore these and they carried blankets and some food items, and then they got discarded in the first part of the war because who's going to carry all this stuff around with them? Haversack that the soldiers lived out of. Their food would be in here. Had a liner, cloth liner. Other items that I have in here. Replicated officer's sword.